So even though my father is German, I haven't spoken German for a very long time, and I used to live in the Netherlands, so I end up speaking this very weird mix of German and Dutch, which just annoys everyone. So I'm going to give this presentation in English. There is quite a lot of content, so I may speak fast. So if I'm speaking too quickly, please say langsam bitte at me, and I'll slow down. So the first thing I'll say, and I've looked out in the audience, and there's actually quite a few of my customers here today. But the first thing I'll say is, all those things after my name, all they mean is that I once worked for a company that had a training budget. So I am older than I look, which is one of the reasons these have been amassed over a 25-year career in information security. So I don't spend HP's money just sitting on courses all day long. But there's a saying in the UK, and that is that clickers don't work. Oh. There you go. Believe it or not, that's an Oxide branded clicker, right? An HP Oxide branded clicker. So I'm not saying anything about our technology here. So there's a saying in the UK that is that danger is my middle name. It isn't, it's Charles. But those of you that know me as a customer probably wouldn't have seen this side of me. But I ride a Harley Davidson, I surf, kayak, I mountain climb. That's me jumping out of an aircraft at 30,000 feet, doing a high altitude, low opening jump. I used to competitively mountain bike. I'm a technical diver. I've dived down to 120 metres. I dive quite a lot on Trimix rebreathers. I own a part share in a powerboat, which I live on the south coast of the UK and I use. But, so you could say that I enjoy adrenaline sports, but there is nothing more dangerous than being a CISO in today's environment. Just look at the breaches we've had over the last year. You've probably been reading in the news about Anthem. When there's a breach, reality has nothing to do with customers' perceptions. So everyone knows the Sony breach, the Sony Pictures breach, wasn't handled in particularly very well. The press weren't handled very well. They didn't have holding statements to tell the media that they were investigating to stop them speculating. And what happens is customers' perception is everything. And the reality is most people are still stuck in this protection bias. Our firewalls will protect us, our antivirus will protect us. And they spend money on technology because technology, you can take your CFO to come down and see and point at the blinky light flashing. And they don't leave the company after 2 years, like staff do, when you've invested the money in training them. But the reality is technology only gets you so far. So we live in this time now where the board is aware, they're reading in the papers every day, your customers are reading in the paper every day, that retail systems are unsecure, industrial control systems are unsecure. Just look at the media attention that's been paid to the German blast furnace incident over the last couple of months. So I used to be a CISO, and I had hair before I was a CISO, and I was actually the CISO of Europe's largest software as a service company, and to be honest, I'm glad I'm not a CISO anymore. So I get to talk to CISOs about the same problems I had 4 years ago, but I'm glad I'm not in the current environment. So there is a quote here from Anton Jivokin. Some of you may know him as the author of the O'Reilly book, Security Warrior. He's now a Gartner, even though the logo has moved a little bit further down on this presentation. He's a Gartner analyst for security, information and event management systems. There's been a lot of talk in the media that SIM is dead, and it's all about analytics. And I'll talk about analytics later, but it's actually a mixture of analytics and real-time correlation and people and process and business alignment that gives you good security. But the reality is, we go in and we see a lot of organisations and gather their business requirements and then baseline what they're doing. It's something we call a security operations maturity assessment. And the reality is, most people are using SIMs wrong, or they haven't invested in modelling their risk into the SIM, or they don't have the right skills on the console to interpret the data that's coming out, or they don't have the right processes to make that content better. So it's usually not SIMs that are broken, it's that people and process aspect of it. And actually, that's one of the easiest things to solve. Choosing the right product is actually quite an easy thing to do. So we see lots of times customers that move from ArcSight to IBM Q1, to McAfee Nitro, maybe to Splunk, maybe to Logarithm, or they move to ArcSight because the previous product wasn't working. But the reality is, if they fix the people, process, and business alignment product, they would get more value out of the product that they have. So with that in mind, this is actually the department that I work for, why we were created. So back in 2007, ArcSight been on the market for about 6 or 7 years. We were a part of ArcSight before the HP acquisition. And the reality was people were buying our product and not being successful. And what they wanted to do is get a group of people that have been experienced in running operationally security operations centres. So these are people that have done the job of the CISO, the SOC manager, the analyst trainer, and actually bring that operational experience to bear on customers. So what happened is we were formed as a consulting division, very small, only 50 of us globally. But between those 50 of us, it's actually now up to 275 years worth of experience of actually working in SOCs and doing the jobs and having the same problems as customers have, improving the value of security, retaining staff. So that's who we are. In those sort of 7 to 8 years, we've actually built 47 security operations centres from the ground up. I saw the attendee list. 2 of them are in the audience, where we built the entire security operations capability from the ground upwards. That is recruiting the staff, getting the roles and responsibilities defined, all of the processes in there, getting SOC knowledge management, getting the right use cases into the tool, mentoring and training staff, and leaving the customer with a fully functional SOC. The other thing, which is really relevant, is this SOC assessment. So what we do there is we go in, ask the customer what they're trying to build, what are they trying to protect against, and then assess their current capability against it and give them a roadmap of improvements that they need to do to first achieve business goals, but then go beyond that to actually achieve best practice, which we consider to be a CMMI level of 3 in over 168 different areas. So that's you're doing something, it's documented, collecting metrics, and you're making it better. And I'll talk more about this later. So this is my obligatory marketing slide to pay for my time today. But the one thing that I'll point you to is we release a report annually called the State of Security Operations. And what that does is it takes these assessments and we look at trends. What is happening? You know, this year, the biggest problem for security operations is retaining and acquiring staff. The level of use of threat intelligence and information sharing between different companies has gone up compared with last year. Another thing is the most mature security operations capabilities exist within technology companies, shortly followed by telcos. And retail. Retail is actually quite high. All of these trends we put into this report that we publish annually. It's free of charge, download it, that's what I'd recommend. So what I'm going to talk about today is we've done all of these assessments and we've seen, in our experience of some of us working 25 years in this space, that there's been 5 distinct generations of security operations centres. And what I really want to focus on at the end of the presentation is what you should be building now for that 5G, that 5th generation security operations centre. And also what I want to do is say, if you're stuck in a first and second generation security operations center, which in our experience, when we do these maturity assessments, most of our customers are, you can skip 3, 4 and go straight to 5. Right? So you can actually implement a very mature security operations center, the foundational capability with the continual improvement that will just get better over time in as little as 6 to 12 months, with the right roadmap, the right planning, and the right commitment from your management. And I'll talk more about how to actually do that. So this is one of the security operations centers that we've created. This is actually the Cyber Defense Center in HP, Palo Alto. So this is all built on our processes. This is all built on our workflow. These are all analysts that we've trained. The use case that you can see in the background here is a big data, use that word, use case. RSA, big data, was a really big topic. We've been doing big data use cases for 6, 7, 8, 9 years. It's called analytics. It's called pattern discovery. It's only now that it's really become a buzzword. But this is actually collecting 25 to 29 billion events a week. That is every DNS query that the 380,000 employees of HP do. And we look for anomalies in those, using various different analytics techniques. And we've discovered, on average, around 9 zero-day infections on corporate machines from that. This is stuff that has got through our IDSs, our IPSs, has got through our host-based intrusion protection, our antivirus, that has got through every stage of our protection, and we're only detecting it because it is now going out and querying command and control servers. So, by the way, I did actually zoom in on this to make sure there were no usernames and passwords written on this whiteboard. So if you download this presentation later, you won't see any artifacts on there. These are some examples of our thought leadership. As I said, download this one from this Earl. This is very good. This covers the topic that I'm going to talk about today. So you'll be able to get a lot more information around that. So I'm going to very quickly go through generation 1 to 4 so that we can focus on good practice, what good SOCs should look like today. So the first SOCs that ever existed, they started in the 1970s, and they had a really long run. They had nearly 25 years worth of run. And the reason being for that is the internet wasn't really interconnected to consumers. You know, it was a hard place to get connected to. If you think about the 1970s, it was mini mainframe computers. It's easy to secure a system where you have a hardwired serial line going from the terminal all the way back to the server. But it was also the birth of the ARPANET and the internet. But if you think about things, you know, there wasn't also the level of malicious content, or at least the criminal intent that there was. Nation states hadn't woken up to the fact that it's a lot easier to hack into systems than it is to actually employ human intelligence agents and run them. And just for the record, my background is in signals intelligence for the UK military. And I have to say, as you're a lot of Germans in the audience, not GCHQ. I did not know. In fact, we discovered GCHQ in Bankdrücken, one of our customers. So we've helped protect one of our customers against a nation-state actor, which embarrassingly was one of my fellow countrymen. So we started here with these nuisance programs, worms, you know, things that destroyed content, but not things that were monetizing content. There wasn't this concept of hacktivism. But we saw the first kinds of security operations centers and computer emergency response teams being set up. And largely, how they worked is it was single log analysis. So what was happening is your logs were going into multiple different places, and then an individual had to look through those individual logs, and correlation was all in your brain. You know, it was like, I've seen something here, I've seen something here. It wasn't very efficient. And there were some tools that came around, like redlining tools, that would look for suspicious artifacts, what you would now call an indicator of compromise in a log file. This is suspicious. But what it couldn't do is look at the overall context, because there was no correlation. It would just say, this file, something suspicious is happening, but you couldn't understand the context of it. So after those 25 years of the first generation, we then had the second generation. And the second generation started to rely on correlation and SIM. SIM first came to market, two products, Net Forensics and ArcSight. At the time, I worked for Net Forensics when they started. And we started to see the first kind of malicious, self-propagating worms as well. And the first MSSPs, because SIMs came along, and people couldn't get the staff to understand the complexity of installing a SIM. They didn't have the right skills to look at the console. And because a lot of SIMs back then were giving not very meaningful information, they couldn't raise the value in the business to make that investment in people. Ironically, that's still a problem now. So, if I go back to my first slide, people not getting value out of a SIM for exactly the same reasons. They can't justify the investment, they can't prove the value, and they're not got the right skills behind the console. We also started to see things like IDSs and mailing lists and things like that to use as resources against the attack. So we started to now see these three different log files, because this is typically all SOC SIMs used to be able to correlate at that stage, providing some context to the analyst. So now he's getting a single event that shows him what's going on. Now, I mentioned earlier that one of the challenges is that a lot of people are stuck in second generation SIM. If you look here, they're getting logs from firewalls, IDSs and IPSs, and network equipment, proxies and things like this. If I go in and I see most customers I evaluate, that's where they're getting their logs from. In 2015, it's still these perimeter devices that they're getting logs from. Why in most cases? Because they can't get the buy-in from IT operations to give them database logs, to give them identity and access management, to give them application logs, to give them logs from registry changes and things like that. And why? Because the IT operations department has this adversarial relationship with security operations quite a lot of the time. One of the things to do, and I'll talk more about this in the 5G component, is to get IT operations involved in the modelling of risk and understanding the part they play, and they feel ownership of what goes into the SIM. And once they feel ownership of that, they start to be cooperative. And then you can build out this fifth generation capability that looks at what people are doing. What is their intent? What is their capability? Why are they doing it? Not just what is happening. So we're still stuck in this. 70% of the customers I go and see are stuck in this 1995, 2001 way of doing things. So this is what SIMs used to look like. Some SIMs still look like this. And you needed a human to look at the event that was coming in and to provide context around that. So you started to have skills in the analysts that are looking at the console so they could interpret how, what, why, when that is happening. And unfortunately, an awful lot of SOCs, they can't answer those questions. And they produce meaningless reports that go to management that tell you have 47 unauthorized access attempts last month. It's meaningless. Which systems, who was doing it? Was it coming from a competitor? What were they going after? A lot of the metrics we give management are completely meaningless and pointless. The only thing they can do is the figure going up and going down. No wonder we can't get the investment to pay for people. And a lot of this is technology bias, not business bias. So the 3G SOC, what we started to see now is government SOCs starting to really talk about best practice. We started to see things like PCI and Sarbanes-Oxley starting to dictate best practice because organisations themselves had not been able to achieve good information security. So external third parties were now coming and saying, this is what you must do. The problem is, what's good for your organisation is not going to be what's good for your organisation. It's not going to be what's good for your organisation. This tick box compliance, even though some people say it gives us a good baseline, the problem is you stay at that baseline. And if you look at Target when they were breached and lost all those credit card numbers, they were PCI compliant. Home Depot, PCI compliant. It does not equal security. But if you get good security, you should get compliance. So what you start to see is more organisations creating SOCs internally. And I have to say, we're looking at 2005 now. We were created in 2007 because there was a demand for it. But I've never had so much interest as I've had in the last 3 months. Our telephone numbers are ringing off because the boards are waking up every day and seeing CISOs losing their jobs. You may have seen that the second in command at Sony Pictures has now resigned, given up her contract earlier. So we're now looking at much more than just this perimeter devices. We're starting to look at things like applications, databases, proxies, the host logs. So we've got much more context. Most people buy SIMs wrong, right? This is a topic I'll say most times. And I've got to admit, vendors will sell SIMs wrong as well. Both parties are responsible for this. SIMs are sold like this magical box where you just throw all your events into it. And I don't know what the German mythical monster is, but I use the Loch Ness Monster, leprechauns. Some magic happens in this SIM, and it pops out meaningful information that will tell your management everything that's happening in your business and what to do next. The reality isn't that. You have to model the risk. What is your most important application? Who are your most important users? Where does your data sit? Who is likely to attack you? How are they likely to do it? You break it down into a set of actions that they will take, and you try and detect them at every stage. So if you miss it, because the signature doesn't work, because the data is encrypted, the attack's encrypted, you will catch them at internal and lateral movement or exfiltration of data. But that's not what we do. We push all our events into this SIM and hope that the default content in the SIM catches it. So there's a lot of my colleagues in the audience as well. We get requests for information from customers that just list, here's my event sources and here's my events per second, build me something. They don't talk about business risk. They don't talk about what they're trying to detect or who they're trying to protect against. And then hopefully we come in and we change the conversation. We start to say, okay, you're in oil and gas, so industrial control systems are a problem for you. Third-party suppliers are a problem for you. Internal selling of GIS information about future well locations, leaving the organisations are a problem. Okay, how is that likely to manifest itself? Someone, passing that data out over email, passing it over USB key. Okay, how can we detect that at each stage? Them accessing the data, them copying the data, them taking the USB keys off site. So that business conversation, even though the technology did it, is still not happening with 3G SOCs. So we go and we see some of our customers have got more event feeds, but the event feeds are not telling them anything. So this big data question, a SIM, as a saying in the UK, finding a needle in a haystack. That's what a SIM does. A SIM finds the needle, it finds the bale of hay the needle is in. You still need someone to dig through that bale of hay to look at the needle, work out how big it is, what coloured thread is there, who put it there, and answer those questions. That's the human aspects of security operations. But you don't find that needle easier by adding more hay. Right? And pushing all of your events into a SIM is adding more hay. Big data is more hay. You still have to have a use case, something suspicious, a hook, to start this query against all that data that you have in systems. Otherwise, you're just looking blindly through them. So we're starting to get to the 4th generation Security Operations Center now. So also the analyst skills. So I'm just conscious of time here, so I'm going to go through it. So the analyst needed to know more. No? So, and when you consider, when we build security operations centers, we want an analyst to investigate at level 1 an incident in 3 to 5 minutes. We want them to do 15 to 20 events per hour. So your analyst needs to be able to answer all of these questions in 3 to 5 minutes. And to do that, they need to be trained and they need to have the right tools integrated into the operations system, so that you don't have to break out and swivel chair into other applications. So now we get to 4G SOCs, and this is where most customers are now. You'll recognise things like Heartbleed, or Cook, the Ukrainian hacking gang, Bradley Manning, or Chelsea as he is now, Mr. Snowden, LOLSEC, Syrian Electronic Army. These are all things that are very relevant at the moment. So what we've done to try and detect these is we start to look at the activities that users are doing. So instead of like modelling your infrastructure, which is what most people do, they throw all of their events into the SIM. What are they doing? They're not modelling the behaviour of attacker, they're actually modelling what their networks look like and what their defences look like. And what does the SIM try and do? And what are you trying to do with all these security controls? You're trying to track an attacker. So we have a saying in HP that's led by a senior vice president of our business unit, and that is think like a bad guy. And too many of us in the information security industry have grown up on the blue team. So we've been firewall admins, and then eventually we become a CISO. And we're so obsessed with technology, we're not thinking about who's attacking us, what is their motivation, how much effort are they going to exert coming after us, what is their modus operandi, what tools, techniques and procedures are they going to use. And that's that top-down approach. Line of business, who's going to attack us, how are they going to do it, how are we going to detect and defend against that. Hence the name of today's event. So we're still all feeding into the analyst though. So SIMs have got a little bit more funky looking, but it's still a SIM. You still need the right skills and the right modelling in there. But now, the analyst has much more to do. So again, you think about that 3 to 5 minutes, I want an analyst to answer these questions in that 3 to 5 minutes. It needs higher skills, it's a higher stress environment, and it needs better integration with tools. So incidentally, some of the assessments we've done, some customers to handle a malware infection that involves a remote access Trojan that is going out and speaking to a command and control server, some customers can deal with that in around 3 to 4 minutes. Other customers, it's up to 75 days to deal with that incident. I have one customer, a bank in Italy, and what they had is I went in and I saw this SOC. I should have known there was a problem to start with, because I walked into the SOC and they were watching football on the big screens, and they saw me come in, look around, and closed all that down. And then I got the SIM coming up in the background. And he had these big long rows of benches, and I'm like, this is a big SOC. It had 7 rows of like 10 consoles. That's 70 people, right? And then when I actually saw them start to deal with incidents, it was insanity, right? The guy started on the left-hand side, that was his SIM. And he would get an event coming in, and then he would swivel chair to the next console that was EPO. He would collect data from EPO, but there was no ticketing system, no case workflow. So what he did is he mailed himself the logs from EPO, then swiveled over to the next system that was Tipping Point SMS's console, and then he would get the logs from that, then email it to himself, and then he would collect all his emails and then paste them into Remedy to create a case. Like, get rid of all of that and just make it right-click tools, and you can do that in like 2 to 3 minutes, as opposed to taking a day and a half it took him to even escalate incidents to the IT operations to clean systems. And that day and a half can be the difference between leaking 20 gigs of data or 10K in the initial conversations with an external command and control system. So now we talk about 5G SOC. This is the bulk of what I want to talk about. So we've had 10 years of breaches, and they're starting to get worse. I can't even add things to this fast enough. I submitted this presentation a few days ago, and the anthem's not up there. So we're getting breaches so fast. I actually need to make this dynamic and go out to a website to collect information about who's been breached, so that I can put it in there. There is also a rise of hacktivism as well, and people doing things for malicious purposes. Nation-state actors, obviously, we all know what's happened to NATO, to Angela Merkel's phone, to Bankdrücken. We all know what's happened there. So the other problem is we build security operations centres and then we leave them. Right? So if you built your security operations centre 8 years ago, is it going to be able to handle these threats? Have you outsourced anything in the last 8 years and taken on a supplier that produces insider risk to you? How has that been captured? So, security operations isn't a destination, it's a journey. And that's a very cliched thing. But you need to make sure that your security operations capability is adapting and changing to the way things have changed. So this is another quote from Ein Technologie-Evangelist. So what makes up a 5G SOC? I haven't got enough time to go through this in detail. Those of you who've seen my presentations, there's quite a few in the room, know I could talk around this slide for 4 hours. This talks about capturing the difference between log management and SIM. There's a lot of difference. Log everything. Keep all your logs for forensics purposes and operational purposes, but SIMs are there for one job, to detect malicious activity in progress and to inform you about it so that you can hopefully stop it before it happens or deal with it quickly after it has to minimise the impact. But the SIM, the more information you feed it, these are what we consider low fidelity events. They don't tell you much about what's going on. An IDS and an IPS, much as they are very useful to put in front of critical systems these days, how much of your data is encrypted over SSL? Does your workers' council let you break out that SSL to look inside those people's communications? Probably not. So the functionality of IPS is very limited these days. You also need a SIM which is going to be able to investigate and detect incidents without breaching your individual user's privacy. So being able to investigate actions and find out if it is something malicious without knowing who's doing it, by just having an identifier which you can't work out which employee it is until you know it's a real event, and then you can bring the two together. That's important for privacy and workflow implications. So what we also have here is the SIM tells you what's going on in your organisation, but you are not an island, right? You need to have threat intelligence. And threat intelligence, a lot of vendors will tell you, is a subscription. Buy something from us, remind you, we'll tell you what's going on. That is not useful in itself. And also, it's overkill. Right? Threat intelligence is as much as taking your domain name, so I take hp.com, and then I create a Google alert that looks for hp.com in pastebin. All of a sudden, if someone dumps any passwords or any doxing information into pastebin about hp.com employees, I've got a notification that can go into the SIM. It's things like also looking at your supply chain. Who are your suppliers? Are any of are they subscribed to mailing lists? I actually caught one of my suppliers when I was a CISO putting our authentication code onto a developer's forum, which was accessible via the web, to ask a question about the authentication code that we used in our product. That's not good. But these kind of things are simple things. That email example, you can go back and do that in 5 minutes. Leverage Google, leverage their platform, make them do the legwork for you, and then all you've got to do is process the alerts as they come in. There's an awful lot you can do with threat intelligence pragmatically without paying for these massive subscriptions of data. Now, it's all the better if you can share information among vertical market peers and your colleagues. But taking information around configuration management, that's important as well. How do you handle those changes to your environment? So one of the things that we do quite a lot is we work in virtual environments. So when a customer spins up a new machine of a certain type, it notifies the SIM that someone stood up a new Exchange server. It automatically pre-configures the virtual machine to send its logs to the logger and the SIM, and everything's up from day one. So if you're working in these very elastic environments, but also how do you handle cloud and outsourced environments? You need to consider, can your contracts mean that the events from these external third parties go into your SIM as well? So when you start thinking about a SIM, a lot of it isn't the technology and the event sources, it's thinking about the process, the contractual obligations that sit with your customers. Then we have the people that see the data, the executives. The most important thing to them is not these count or metric-based reports. I've seen 47 privilege escalation events last month. Great. What systems were they on? The worst report I've ever seen is malware infections. Do you send a report to your management and tell them how many malware infections you've got? Well, a malware infection on the secretary's machine who works in marketing is different than and this malware, by the way, is ransomware. It's locked up the details about a campaign you're launching next year. The next type of malware is a remote access Trojan that has gone onto a system that is holding cardholder data. And it's got a permanent 443 connection going out to the outside world to an IP address in the Russian business network. Now, if you look at that count metric, they're both malware infections. They're both worth 1 in that report. But if you can give a report that shows the system that was affected is funds transfer, cardholder systems, our HMI server that is managing our industrial control systems, then that becomes more meaningful. And that usually needs some form of human interpretation, engaging of it. So there is a way to do this without involving humans, what we call a virtual SOC. But ultimately, the biggest organisations, and looking at most of the names here, you should have at least a couple of people looking at the SIM. But most organisations, they get rid of those people after a while. Why? Because the wrong things are going into the SIM. They're getting nothing coming into the console because their use cases are wrong. Or they're getting so much into the console, they can't do anything meaningful with it because they've done this bottom-up approach to modelling the risk, not this top-down from the line of business. So what we have here is the level 1 analysts. Their job is triage. Is it a false positive? Yes. Then perfect the rule, put it back in production. If it is a real event, they then send it to a specialist. So these people are typically graduates, 3 months worth of training, low-cost resources, high volume. These people are subject matter experts in particular areas, data leakage, policy infractions, malware infections, and it's their job is to actually deal with those incidents and investigate them. So when they hand it to the incident response team, you have those questions answered. Who is attacking me? What tools are they using? What is their level of motivation based on the tools that they're using and where we caught them in that attack chain? Why are they doing it? Some of the most difficult questions to ask and answer. When did it start? Is it part of a campaign? Is it a one-off? What other activities have happened? So in that 3 to 5 minutes, that person should answer as much of that information as possible. And if you just think about it, that way of doing things is much more interesting. I talked earlier about keeping staff. If you're an analyst and all you're getting is all of these raw events bleeding in with no context and you have to take a day and a half swiveling between these different systems, how stressful is your job? How interesting is your job? Probably not very. And then we wonder why we lose analysts in typically 6 to 18 months. But if you've got a job where your tools and your modelling of risk shows you everything you need to know, so you understand who's doing something, why they're doing it, their impact on the business, and you can escalate that in 2 to 3 minutes, and you've done 27 of those in a day, how do you feel about your job and the value that you're bringing to the business? That's why SOCs built this way typically retain their level 1 staff for 18 to 36 months, right? Rather than the 6 to 12 months that typically people leave the business. Either that or they start bringing handguns into work, which is never good. So the other thing is this hunting. These are the people, so the SIM is looking for the known knowns, right? Things where we've modelled activities of attackers. But who could have predicted Heartbleed? Who could have predicted things like bad USB? So there is unknown unknowns, and the job of the hunt team is to search for those. So a hunt team is typically a level 2 analyst, a subject matter expert, and a data scientist. This person is not an expert in information security, he's an expert in data visualization, data preparation, and analytical techniques. And he's led by the analysts to look for unknown unknowns. And the way you build your use case content in that staged way of looking for things allows you to have pools of suspicious activity that's not definitely an event, but it's enough for the hunting to start looking, pulling that apart and investigating. This is big data. We've been doing it for 7 years, by producing these hunt teams and putting them into security operations capabilities. So these are the key tenets to the 5G SOC, and I'm going to keep going until I run out of time going into these into detail. But the most important thing is recognise you're not tracking down malware. You are not tracking down a denial of service attack. There is a human behind this doing it for a reason. Understanding what their motivations are and why they're doing it will tell you how much effort they will put in, what tools they are likely to use, and how much risk you are facing. Right? So if you're facing the Syrian Electronic Army, that is different than if you're facing GCHQ, and thanks to Snowden, the NSA, because we now know a lot of the techniques that they will use. So the level of effort you need to put into defending, but also the impact they will have. Syrian Electronic Army are trying to deface and embarrass. The NSA are trying to capture information about what your government is doing and what your organisation is doing to act on an international stage. So different intent, different motivations, different capabilities. So understanding that and modelling that at the highest level is one of the most important things. I mentioned modelling the attackers. So once you know who your attacker is, and you know what they're likely to use and how they're likely to do it, that's what drives your use cases. So people think use cases are rules in the sim, and they're not. What a use case is that risk to the line of business, that actual attack that they're going to do, and then it's what you do to investigate and mitigate that. So, is time's up? Okay, excellent. So, there's obviously quite a lot here. The slides will be available afterwards. But what I'm doing, I'm around all day. So if anyone wants to drill into any of these in greater detail or anything that I've said today, please feel free to pop past the HP stand. I'll be down there. So thanks very much.